The sun was just coming up when the black car pulled up to the military base gate. It was early morning and most people were still sleeping. Inside the car sat Sarah Martinez. She was tired from traveling all night, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She had come a long way to get here. Sarah looked out the window at the tall metal gates in front of her. This was Fort Henderson, one of the biggest military bases in the country. Tomorrow she would officially become the commanding general of this entire place. But today she wanted to see it with her own eyes before anyone knew who she was. She was wearing normal clothes. A simple blue blazer, black pants, and comfortable shoes. No uniform. No stars on her shoulders. No signs that she was a high-ranking military officer. She wanted to walk around the base like a regular person. She wanted to see how things really worked when nobody was trying to impress the boss. The driver stopped the car near the checkpoint. Sarah thanked him and stepped out. The morning air was cool and fresh. She could hear birds singing in the trees nearby. The base looked peaceful and quiet. 2 young soldiers stood at the gate. They wore clean uniforms with shiny buttons. Their boots were polished until they gleamed. They looked very young, maybe only 19 or 20 years old. One was tall with red hair. The other was shorter with dark eyes and serious face. Sarah walked toward them with confidence. She had walked through many military gates in her 25 years of service. She had been to bases all over the world. She had served in war zones and peace zones. She had earned every rank through hard work and courage. The tall soldier with red hair saw her coming. He stepped forward and raised his hand. "Ma'am, please stop right there," he said. His voice was firm but polite. Sarah stopped walking. She smiled at him. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, ma'am," the soldier replied. "This is a restricted military area. You cannot enter without proper authorization." Sarah nodded. She understood. Security was important on a military base. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her military identification card. She held it out to the soldier. The soldier took the card and looked at it quickly, but he barely glanced at it before handing it back to her. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This area is off limits to civilians. You need to turn around and leave." Sarah's smile faded a little. "Did you read the card?" she asked calmly. The shorter soldier stepped forward now. He looked nervous. "Ma'am, we have strict orders. No unauthorized personnel can enter this base. You need to leave now." Sarah took a deep breath. She kept her voice calm and steady. "Private, I suggest you look at that identification card more carefully." The tall soldier looked at his partner. They both seemed unsure. The shorter one took the card from Sarah's hand and studied it this time. His eyes moved over the words slowly. "It says Colonel," he said to his partner, "but she's wearing civilian clothes." "Lots of people make fake IDs," the tall soldier said. "Remember what they told us in training? We had 3 security briefings about people trying to sneak onto the base." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her face calm. She had been in much more difficult situations than this. She had faced enemy soldiers. She had made life and death decisions in combat. She could handle 2 confused young guards. "I understand your concern about security," she said, "but I am Colonel Sarah Martinez. I have every right to enter this base." The tall soldier shook his head. "Ma'am, you can't enter." "I don't care what that card says." "You're not in uniform. You don't have any escort, and we weren't told about any colonel visiting today." A few other people started to notice what was happening. A group of soldiers walking to breakfast stopped to watch. 2 maintenance workers in coveralls paused near their truck. A woman in an administrative uniform slowed down as she passed by. Sarah stood very still. She kept her hands where the guards could see them. She knew that getting angry would not help. These young men were just doing their job as they understood it. The problem was that they did not understand their job very well. More people gathered around. Some of them pulled out their phones. Sarah saw them starting to record video. She knew this moment was about to become a big problem for someone. She just hoped it would not become a bigger problem for these 2 young guards than it needed to be. The shorter guard was sweating now. He looked at the ID card again, then at Sarah, then at the growing crowd. "Maybe we should call someone," he whispered to his partner. "We're supposed to handle security ourselves," the tall one whispered back. But he looked worried too. Sarah waited. She did not tap her foot. She did not cross her arms. She did not raise her voice. She just stood there with the patience of someone who had learned that rushing often made things worse. A woman in the crowd called out, "That's Colonel Martinez. I saw her picture in the military newspaper." But the guards did not seem to hear her. Or maybe they did not believe her. Finally, the tall guard spoke into his radio. "Sergeant Davies, we have a situation at the main gate. We need a supervisor here immediately." Sarah almost smiled. Now things would get interesting. While they waited, nobody spoke. The guards watched Sarah carefully, as if she might suddenly do something dangerous. Sarah watched the base beyond the gate. She could see soldiers running in formation. She could see vehicles moving between buildings. She could see the flag flying high above the headquarters building. This would be her command soon. All of these people would follow her orders. All of these buildings and vehicles and resources would be her responsibility. She would be in charge of training, discipline, mission readiness, and the welfare of every single person on this base. But right now, she could not even get through the front gate. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. The crowd grew larger. Some people were laughing. Others looked embarrassed. A few senior soldiers in the crowd looked angry. Then Sarah heard the sound of a jeep engine. A military vehicle came racing up to the gate from inside the base. It stopped with a screech of tires. A man in his 40s jumped out. He had sergeant stripes on his uniform and a worried look on his face. His name tag said Davies. He was carrying a tablet computer. Sergeant Davies looked at the 2 guards, then at Sarah, then at the crowd. His face went from worried to shocked to terrified in about 3 seconds. He looked down at his tablet and pressed some buttons. Sarah knew what he was doing. He was checking her identification against the official database. He was seeing her photo, her rank, her service record, and probably the memo that said she would be arriving today to take command as the new general. Sergeant Davies's face turned pale. He looked like he might be sick. "At ease," Sarah said quietly to the 2 guards. They immediately stood straighter, their hands at their sides. Sergeant Davies walked up to Sarah. He saluted sharply, his hand trembling slightly. "Colonel Martinez," he said. His voice cracked a little. "I apologize deeply for this situation. These men are new to the base and they didn't—" Sarah held up one hand. "We will discuss this inside, Sergeant Davies," she said. Her voice was not angry, but it was firm. "Open the gate, please." Davies turned to the guards. "Open the gate immediately." The tall guard rushed to the control panel. His hands shook as he pressed the buttons. The large metal gate began to slide open with a loud mechanical sound. Sarah walked through the gate with her head high. Sergeant Davies followed her, still apologizing. The 2 young guards stood frozen, their faces white with fear. As Sarah passed the crowd, she heard whispers. "That's the new general. Those guards are in so much trouble. Did you get that on video? This is going to be all over the base by lunchtime." Sarah kept walking. She had a lot of work to do. Sergeant Davies drove the jeep through the base with Sarah sitting in the passenger seat. Neither of them spoke. The sergeant's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that his knuckles were white. Sarah looked out the window, watching the base pass by. They drove past rows of barracks where soldiers lived. They passed the training fields where young recruits learned to be warriors. They went by the motor pool full of military vehicles. Everything looked clean and organized. But Sarah knew that what looked good on the surface might hide problems underneath. The jeep stopped in front of a large building. This was the headquarters. Inside this building, the base commander had his office. Sergeant Davies jumped out and opened the door for Sarah. "The commander is waiting for you, ma'am," Davies said. He still looked scared. Sarah followed him inside. The building was cool and quiet. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Young soldiers working at desks looked up as they passed. Their eyes went wide when they saw Sarah. The news was already spreading fast. They climbed stairs to the 2nd floor. Davies knocked on a large wooden door. "Come in," a voice called from inside. The office was big with windows that looked out over the base. Behind a desk sat Colonel Thompson. He was a large man with gray hair and a thick mustache. He stood up quickly when Sarah entered. "Colonel Martinez," he said, walking around his desk. "I heard about the incident at the gate. I cannot tell you how sorry I am. Those guards will be disciplined immediately." Sarah sat down in a chair without being asked. "Sit down, Colonel Thompson," she said. Thompson sat. He looked confused. Usually, lower-ranking officers stood when a higher-ranking officer was in the room. But Sarah wanted this to feel like a conversation, not a formal meeting. "Tell me about those 2 guards," Sarah said. "They're new, ma'am. Only been here for 2 months. Fresh out of basic training. I'll have them written up for this." They showed terrible judgment. Sarah shook her head. I'm not interested in punishing them right now. I want to understand why they made the decision they made. Thompson shifted in his chair. They're young. They made a mistake. But why did they make that specific mistake? Sarah asked. She leaned forward. They saw a woman in civilian clothes. They saw a military ID that clearly said Colonel. But they decided I was probably a fake. Why? Thompson did not answer right away. He looked at his desk. Sarah continued. How many female officers do you have on this base, Colonel? We have a few, Thompson said. I'd have to check the exact number. Check now, please, Sarah said. Thompson turned to his computer and typed. He looked at the screen. We have 3 female officers currently stationed here, out of 200 total personnel. 3, Sarah repeated. That's 1.5%. Yes, ma'am. And how many female soldiers total? More typing. 14 enlisted women. 17 women total on the base. Sarah stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the soldiers training below. Less than 10%, she said quietly. She turned back to Thompson. I want to speak with those 3 female officers today. Can you arrange that? Of course, ma'am. And I want to speak with some of the enlisted women, too. Privately. No supervisors present. Thompson looked nervous. May I ask why, ma'am? Because something happened to me this morning that should never happen to a colonel, Sarah said. And I want to know if it's an isolated incident or a pattern. Over the next 3 days, Sarah conducted interviews. She met with Lieutenant Jessica Park, who worked in logistics. She met with Captain Maria Rodriguez, who was a medical officer. She met with Lieutenant Amy Chen, who worked in communications. She also met with enlisted women. Private Johnson, who worked in the motor pool. Specialist Williams, who was a medic. Corporal Anderson, who worked in administration. Each conversation was private. Sarah asked them about their experiences on the base. At first, the women were careful with their words. They did not want to complain. They did not want to seem weak. But Sarah was patient. She shared some of her own stories from when she was young. Slowly, the women began to trust her. The stories they told made Sarah angry, but she did not show it. She listened and took notes. Lieutenant Park told her about a time she tried to enter the officers' club. The person at the door assumed she was someone's wife, not an officer herself. When she showed her ID, he was shocked. Captain Rodriguez talked about meetings where male officers spoke over her. They dismissed her medical opinions until a male doctor said the exact same thing. Lieutenant Chen described how soldiers constantly asked if she was lost when she walked around the base. Even when she was clearly heading to her duty station, the enlisted women had even harder stories. Private Johnson said male soldiers in the motor pool made jokes about women not being able to handle tools. They never asked her opinion, even though she had been fixing cars since she was 14. Specialist Williams talked about patients who refused to let her treat them. They wanted a male medic, even though she had more training. Corporal Anderson said she had been stopped at the gate 5 times in 1 month. Each time the guards questioned whether she really worked on the base. They never questioned the male soldiers the same way. Sarah filled 3 notebooks with stories. Some were small things that might seem unimportant by themselves, but together they painted a clear picture. This base had a culture problem. On the 3rd day, Sarah asked Sergeant Davies to come to her temporary office. He arrived quickly, still looking worried. Sit down, Sergeant, Sarah said. He sat on the edge of his chair. I want to know about the guards at the gate, Sarah said. What training do they receive about identifying officers? They study military ranks, ma'am. They learn what different uniforms look like. They're taught to check IDs carefully. Are they taught that officers might arrive in civilian clothes? Davies thought about it. I'm not sure, ma'am. I'd have to check the training manual. Please do that. And I want to know something else. In the past 6 months, how many women have been stopped and questioned at the gate compared to men? I don't know if we keep those statistics, ma'am. Start keeping them, Sarah said. I want numbers. How many men stopped? How many women? How long each person was detained? What questions were asked? Yes, ma'am. I'll get started on that right away. Sarah also walked around the base by herself. She watched how soldiers interacted with each other. She ate in the mess hall and listened to conversations. She visited the gym, the library, the recreation center. She noticed small things. In the mess hall, there were pictures on the walls of famous military leaders throughout history. All men. In the gym, the weight room was full of male soldiers, but women mostly used the cardio machines in a separate area. In the recreation center, there were sports trophies in cases. The men's teams had twice as many trophies as the women's teams, even though they competed in the same leagues. These were small things. Nobody probably thought about them much. But Sarah knew that small things added up. They sent a message about who belonged and who did not. On the fourth day, Colonel Thompson asked to meet with her again. "Ma'am, I've been hearing that you're asking a lot of questions," he said. "Some of the officers are concerned. They're worried you think they're doing something wrong." Sarah looked at him steadily. "Are they doing something wrong?" "No, ma'am. We run a good base here. Our readiness scores are high. Our soldiers are well trained. We haven't had any major incidents." "No major incidents," Sarah repeated. "But what about minor ones? What about daily problems that never get reported, because people think that's just how things are?" Thompson did not answer. Sarah stood up. "Tomorrow I officially take command. I want every soldier on this base at the parade ground at 900 hours. Full dress uniform, no exceptions." "Yes, ma'am. Is there something special you want to address?" Sarah smiled, but it was not a warm smile. "Yes, Colonel. There is definitely something special I want to address." That night, Sarah sat in her temporary quarters and wrote her speech. She wrote and rewrote it many times. She wanted to get it exactly right. The next morning, she put on her uniform for the first time since arriving. She looked at herself in the mirror. The uniform was dark blue with sharp creases. On her shoulders were the stars that showed her rank as general. She had earned these stars through years of hard work, sacrifice, and courage. She thought about the two young guards at the gate. They had been so sure she did not belong here. She thought about all the women she had interviewed. They worked hard every day to prove they belonged. Tomorrow's ceremony would not just be about her taking command. It would be about setting a new direction. It would be about making sure that everyone on this base understood what respect really meant. She picked up her hat and placed it on her head. Then she walked out the door, ready to face her soldiers. The parade ground was massive. It was a flat open area bigger than 3 football fields. The ground was covered with short grass that was cut perfectly even. Around the edges stood tall flagpoles with flags snapping in the morning breeze. By 8:30 in the morning, soldiers began to arrive. They came in groups from all parts of the base. They wore their dress uniforms, which were dark blue with shiny buttons and colorful ribbons that showed their achievements. Their boots were polished so well that they reflected the sunlight. The soldiers formed neat rows facing a platform at the front of the field. Officers stood in the front rows. Enlisted soldiers stood behind them. Everyone stood straight with their hands at their sides. Nobody talked. The only sounds were birds singing and flags flapping in the wind. Sarah stood behind the platform out of sight. She watched through a gap in the temporary walls. She counted the rows. More than 2,000 soldiers were gathering. Every person stationed at Fort Henderson was required to be here. She saw the 2 young guards from the gate. They stood in the front row with other security personnel. The tall one with red hair looked nervous. The shorter one kept his eyes straight ahead, but his face was pale. Sergeant Davies stood near them. He kept glancing at his watch. At exactly 9 o'clock, Colonel Thompson walked onto the platform. He stood at a microphone and called out, "Attention." 2,000 soldiers snapped to attention. The sound of their boots hitting the ground together was like thunder. Thompson began the ceremony. He read official orders from military headquarters. He talked about the history of the base. He thanked the previous commander who had retired last month. His voice was formal and steady. Then he said, "It is my honor to introduce the new commanding general of Fort Henderson. She comes to us with 25 years of distinguished service. She has served in 3 combat zones. She has received 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in battle. She has commanded at every level from platoon to brigade. Ladies and gentlemen, General Sarah Martinez." Sarah walked onto the platform. The soldiers saluted. She saluted back, then stood at the microphone. For a moment, she just looked at all the faces in front of her. Young faces and old faces, men and women. Different races and backgrounds. All of them wearing the same uniform. All of them serving the same country. "At ease," she said. The soldiers relaxed slightly but remained standing. Sarah took a breath and began. 4 days ago, I arrived at the front gate of this base. I was not wearing my uniform. I was dressed in civilian clothes. I showed my military identification card to the guards on duty. They did not believe I was a colonel. They told me I could not enter. They thought I was a fake. She could see soldiers shifting uncomfortably. Some looked at the two guards in the front row. The guards themselves looked like they wanted to disappear. Those two guards are here today, Sarah continued. They are standing in the front row. They are probably terrified right now, wondering if they are about to lose their jobs. The parade ground was completely silent. Everyone was listening. But I am not here to punish them, Sarah said. I am here to talk about why they made the decision they made. And more importantly, I am here to talk about what we are going to do differently from now on. She stepped away from the microphone for a moment and walked to the edge of the platform. She wanted to be closer to her soldiers. I have been in the military for 25 years, she said. When I joined, there were very few women. People told me I was too small for combat. They said women were not strong enough. They said I should work in an office, not on a battlefield. She paused. I ignored them. I worked harder than everyone else. I trained longer. I studied more. I proved myself again and again. And eventually, people stopped questioning whether I belonged. Sarah looked directly at the two young guards. But here is the problem. I should not have had to prove myself more than my male colleagues. I should not have had to work twice as hard to get half the respect. And the women serving on this base today should not have to either. She walked back to the microphone. Over the past 3 days, I have interviewed many soldiers on this base. I asked them about their experiences. What I learned troubled me deeply. Sarah pulled out her notebook. I learned that female officers are regularly questioned when they enter secure areas. Male officers walk through without a second glance. I learned that in meetings, women's ideas are often ignored until a man says the same thing. I learned that female soldiers face constant questions about whether they are lost or whether they really belong here. She closed the notebook. These might seem like small things. Individual incidents. Maybe some of you are thinking, "Nan, that's not a big deal. People just need thicker skin." But let me tell you something. Small acts of disrespect add up. They create an environment where half of our potential soldiers feel like outsiders, and that makes us weaker as a military. A breeze blew across the parade ground. Sarah's voice carried clearly to every soldier. I am not just talking about gender, she continued. I am talking about respect. Real respect. The kind of respect that says every soldier who earns their uniform deserves to be treated with dignity. The kind of respect that judges people by their abilities, not their appearance. The kind of respect that makes us stronger as a team. She saw some soldiers nodding. Others looked thoughtful. Starting today, things are going to change on this base, Sarah said firmly. We are going to implement new training for everyone. Training about unconscious bias. Training about what real professionalism looks like. Training about how to build a culture where everyone can succeed. She pointed to the guards at the front. Private Morrison and Private Jackson stepped forward. The two young guards looked at each other in panic. Slowly, they stepped out of the formation and walked to the front. They stopped and saluted Sarah. Sarah saluted back, then stepped down from the platform to stand in front of them. You two made a mistake, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. But it was a mistake born from poor training and a culture that taught you to be suspicious of women in positions of authority. That is not your fault. That is our fault as leaders. The guards looked surprised. However, Sarah continued, you now have a choice. You can learn from this mistake and become better soldiers, or you can let it defeat you. What do you choose? The tall guard spoke first. We want to learn, ma'am. Good, Sarah said. Then here is your assignment. You will help develop new training materials for gate security. You will help teach other guards about proper procedures for identifying all officers, regardless of what they are wearing. You will become experts on this subject. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, both guards said together. They looked relieved and determined. Sarah nodded. Return to formation. They saluted and went back to their places. Sarah climbed back onto the platform. We are also making other changes. We are creating a mentorship program where junior soldiers can get advice from senior soldiers. We are establishing an anonymous reporting system so people can report problems without fear. We are reviewing all our training materials to remove bias. She gripped the podium. And let me be very clear about something. Discrimination will not be tolerated on this base. Not against women. Not against any race or religion. Not against anyone. If you cannot treat your fellow soldiers with respect, you do not belong in this military. Her voice was like steel. "But I believe in every one of you. I believe you are capable of being better. I believe this base can become a model for the entire military. A place where excellence is rewarded, where teamwork is real, and where everyone has a fair chance to succeed." Sarah stood straighter. "I did not ask to be the first female general to command this base. I would have preferred to be the 100th. But I am here now, and I promise you this. I will work every day to make this base excellent. Not just good, excellent, and I need your help to do it." She looked across all the faces. "Some of you may be uncomfortable with these changes. Change is always uncomfortable. But I ask you to give it a chance. Trust the process. Trust each other. And trust that we are all on the same team." Sarah stepped back from the microphone. "In the military, we have a saying, 'Mission first, people always.' The mission of this base is to train soldiers and maintain readiness. But we cannot complete that mission if we do not take care of our people. All of our people." She raised her hand in salute. "I am honored to serve as your commanding general. I will earn your respect through my actions, not just my rank. Thank you." The soldiers saluted back. Then something unexpected happened. One soldier in the back started clapping. Then another, then more. Soon the entire parade ground was filled with applause. It was against protocol to clap during a military ceremony, but nobody stopped it. Sarah felt emotion rising in her chest, but she kept her face calm. This was just the beginning. Words were easy. The real work would come in the days and weeks ahead. Colonel Thompson stepped forward and dismissed the formation. Soldiers began to leave in orderly groups, but many of them lingered. They stood in small groups talking. Some of them looked excited. Others looked thoughtful. Sarah saw Lieutenant Park, one of the female officers she had interviewed. Park was talking to a group of male officers. They seemed to be having a serious conversation. That was good. People were thinking about what she had said. The morning after the ceremony, Sarah's office was filled with paper. Reports covered her desk. Binders were stacked on chairs. Her computer screen showed spreadsheets with numbers and statistics. She had been working since 5 in the morning, and it was now almost noon. There was a knock on her door. "Come in," Sarah called. Sergeant Davies entered, carrying another stack of folders. "The reports you requested, ma'am." Sarah waved him to a chair. "Tell me what you found." Davies opened the top folder. "Over the past 6 months, guards at the main gate stopped 147 people for additional questioning. Of those, 103 were women. That's 70%. And women make up what percentage of base personnel?" Sarah asked. 8.5%, ma'am." Sarah leaned back in her chair. The numbers were even worse than she had expected. "What reasons did the guards give for stopping these people?" Most said the person looked suspicious or out of place. Some said they wanted to verify credentials. A few said they were just being thorough. "Being thorough," Sarah repeated. "Did they explain why they needed to be more thorough with women than with men?" Davies shook his head. "No, ma'am. I don't think they realized they were doing it." That was the core of the problem. Most people did not realize their own biases. They thought they were being fair while treating people differently. Over the next week, Sarah held meetings with every department on the base. She met with training officers, medical staff, logistics personnel, maintenance crews, and administrative workers. She asked the same questions to everyone. How do you select people for promotion? How do you assign important tasks? How do you handle complaints? How do you measure performance? Many officers were defensive at first. They insisted they treated everyone fairly. But when Sarah showed them the numbers, they could not argue. Women were promoted more slowly. They received fewer leadership opportunities. Their complaints took longer to investigate. Not because of any official policy. There was no written rule that said to discriminate. It happened through 1,000 small decisions that added up to a big problem. Sarah created a task force to address these issues. She appointed Lieutenant Chen to lead it because Chen was smart and organized. She also appointed 3 male officers to the task force because she needed everyone to be part of the solution, not just the women. The task force met every day. They reviewed policies. They interviewed soldiers. They looked at how other military bases handled similar challenges. Meanwhile, Sarah visited different parts of the base every day. She ate breakfast in the mess hall with junior soldiers. She observed training exercises. She stopped by the motor pool to watch mechanics at work. She wanted to see everything with her own eyes. One day, she visited the base school where soldiers could take college classes. She sat in the back of a leadership class and listened. The instructor was a captain named Wilson. He was teaching about decision-making in combat situations. A good leader must be strong, Captain Wilson said. He must be able to make tough choices under pressure. He cannot be emotional or weak. Sarah noticed that Captain Wilson kept saying he. Every example he gave featured a male leader. Every scenario assumed the leader was a man. After class, Sarah asked to speak with Captain Wilson privately. "Captain, I observed your class today," she said. Wilson smiled proudly. "Thank you, ma'am. I've been teaching leadership for 5 years. The students seem to enjoy it. I noticed you only used male pronouns in your examples. You said he more than 30 times. You never said she." Wilson looked confused. "Ma'am, I was just using standard English. He is the generic pronoun for a person." "But it is not generic," Sarah said. "When you always say he, you send a message that leaders are men. Students start to picture only men in leadership roles." "I did not mean it that way, ma'am." "I know you did not mean it. That is exactly the problem. These small choices we do not even notice create barriers for women. From now on, please use both he and she in your examples. Or better yet, use the names of real leaders, both men and women." Wilson nodded slowly. "I can do that, ma'am. I honestly never thought about it before." "That is why we are having these conversations," Sarah said. "So we can all start thinking about it." The changes Sarah was making did not make everyone happy. Some officers complained that she was being too aggressive. Some soldiers said she was making a big deal out of nothing. A few even said she was trying to lower standards to help women. One afternoon, Major Bryant requested a meeting. He was a senior officer who had been at the base for 10 years. He had a reputation as a tough, old-school soldier. "General, I need to speak frankly," Bryant said when he entered her office. "Please do," Sarah replied. "Some of the men are concerned. They feel like they are being blamed for things they did not do. They feel like they are walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing." Sarah had expected this. Change always made some people uncomfortable, especially those who benefited from the old way of doing things. "Major Bryant, I understand that concern. But let me ask you something. Have any men lost their jobs because of these new policies?" "No, ma'am." "Has any man been punished unfairly?" "Not that I know of." "Then what exactly are they afraid of?" Sarah asked. "Are they afraid they cannot treat female soldiers with basic respect? Are they afraid they will accidentally discriminate?" Bryant shifted in his chair. "They just want to focus on the mission, ma'am. They do not want everything to be about gender." Sarah stood up and walked to her window. She looked out at soldiers training on the field below. "Major, our mission is to prepare soldiers for combat. To do that effectively, we need to use all our talent. Right now we are wasting talent because we have created an environment where some soldiers face extra obstacles. That hurts our mission readiness." She turned back to Bryant. "I am not asking anyone to lower standards. I am asking them to apply standards fairly. Is that really too much to ask?" Bryant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When you put it that way, ma'am, no. It is not too much to ask." "Good. Then please help me spread that message. The men on this base respect you. If they hear it from you, they will listen." After Bryant left, Sarah felt tired. Leading change was exhausting. Every day brought new challenges. But she could not stop now. That evening, she attended a dinner at the Officers' Club. It was a monthly social event where officers could relax and build relationships. In the past, very few women attended because they did not feel welcome. Tonight, Sarah made sure to invite all the female officers personally. When she arrived, she was pleased to see Lieutenant Park, Captain Rodriguez, and Lieutenant Chen all there. They sat together at a table near the back. Sarah walked over to them. "May I join you?" They looked surprised but pleased. "Of course, General," Lieutenant Park said. Sarah sat down. "How are things going for each of you?" "I want to know, honestly." The three women looked at each other. Finally, Captain Rodriguez spoke. "It is getting better, ma'am. People are more careful about what they say, but it still feels awkward sometimes." "Awkward how?" Sarah asked. "Like people are trying too hard," Rodriguez explained. "Before they ignored us. Now they make a big show of including us. It does not feel natural yet." Sarah nodded. "That is normal. Change takes time. People need to practice new behaviors until they become habits. It will feel awkward before it feels normal." Lieutenant Chen added, "Some of the male officers seem angry. Not at us directly, but you can feel the tension." "I know," Sarah said. "They feel threatened by change. But that will pass. Once they see that nothing bad happens, that their careers are not in danger, they will relax. They talked for another hour. Sarah listened more than she spoke. She wanted to understand what these women experienced every day. She wanted to know what was working and what was not. Later that night, back in her quarters, Sarah reviewed progress reports. The task force had proposed new training programs. The gate guards had developed better procedures. The officers' club had formed a committee to make social events more inclusive. These were good steps. But Sarah knew the real test would come in the months ahead. Would these changes last? Would they become part of the culture? Or would people slowly slip back into old habits once the pressure was off? She thought about her own career. All the times she had been doubted. All the times she had to prove herself. All the times she had smiled politely while men questioned her competence. She had survived it. She had succeeded despite the obstacles. But that was not good enough. The next generation should not have to fight the same battles. They should be able to focus on being good soldiers, not on proving they belonged. Sarah picked up a pen and started writing notes for tomorrow's meetings. There was still so much work to do. New policies to write, old habits to break, minds to change, but she felt determined. She had not come this far to give up now. This base would change. It would become better. And then maybe other bases would learn from their example. The lamp on her desk cast a warm glow over her papers. Outside, the base was quiet. Most soldiers were sleeping, resting up for another day of training and duty. Sarah worked late into the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight she could see progress, real measurable progress, and that gave her hope. 6 months had passed since Sarah took command of Fort Henderson. Winter had turned to spring, and now early summer sun warmed the base each morning. But the weather was not the only thing that had changed. Sarah sat in her office looking at the latest reports. The numbers told an encouraging story. Female recruitment had increased by 42%. Complaints about discrimination had decreased by 65%. Promotion rates for women and men were now almost equal. But Sarah knew that numbers only told part of the story. The real question was whether the culture had truly changed. There was a knock on her door. "Come in," she called. Private Morrison entered. He was one of the guards who had turned Sarah away at the gate 6 months ago. But now he wore the stripes of a specialist on his sleeve. He had been promoted. "Ma'am, you asked to see me," Morrison said. "Yes, specialist. Please sit down." Sarah gestured to a chair. "I want to hear about the new training program you developed." "How is it going?" Morrison's face lit up. "Very well, ma'am. We have trained over 300 soldiers so far. The feedback has been positive." Over the past 6 months, Morrison and his partner Jackson had become experts on identification procedures and respect and security operations. They had developed a training program that was now required for all gate guards. They taught about proper protocols, unconscious bias, and professional conduct. "Tell me about the most challenging part," Sarah said. Morrison thought for a moment. At first, some of the older guards did not take us seriously. They thought we were too young to teach them anything. But we showed them the statistics. We showed them how many problems were caused by poor procedures. Once they saw the data, most of them came around. And the ones who did not come around? Sarah asked. We reported them to their supervisors. "You made it clear that this training is mandatory and important." That helped, Sarah nodded. "What about you personally? How has this experience changed you?" Morrison looked down at his hands. "Ma'am, 6 months ago I made a terrible mistake. I judged you based on appearance instead of credentials. I was embarrassed and afraid. I thought my military career was over." He looked up at Sarah. "But you gave me a chance to learn and grow. You turned my biggest mistake into my biggest learning opportunity. I will never forget that." "What did you learn?" Sarah asked. "I learned that respect means treating everyone the same, regardless of what they look like. I learned that assumptions can be wrong. And I learned that making a mistake does not have to define you. What matters is what you do after the mistake," Sarah smiled. "That is exactly right, specialist. Keep up the good work." After Morrison left, Sarah walked around the base. This was something she did regularly. She wanted to see daily life with her own eyes, not just read about it in reports. She stopped by the training field where new recruits were learning combat skills. The group was about 30% female, much higher than 6 months ago. Sarah watched as a young woman named Private Davis demonstrated proper hand-to-hand combat techniques. The male instructor praised her form, and asked her to help teach the other recruits. This would not have happened 6 months ago. Back then, male instructors rarely asked female soldiers to demonstrate. They assumed men were better at physical tasks. Sarah continued to the motor pool. She found Private Johnson working on a large truck engine. 3 male soldiers stood around her, watching and asking questions. Johnson was explaining how to diagnose engine problems. The key is to listen, Johnson was saying. Different problems make different sounds. You have to pay attention. One of the male soldiers nodded. That makes sense. Can you show us how to check the fuel system? 6 months ago, Johnson had told Sarah that male soldiers never asked her opinion. They made jokes about women not understanding machines. Now they were asking her to teach them. At lunch, Sarah ate in the mess hall. She sat at a table with a mix of male and female soldiers, officers and enlisted personnel. They were talking and laughing together. The conversation was easy and natural. Lieutenant Park joined the table. General, did you hear? I was selected for the Advanced Logistics course. It is a huge opportunity. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You earned it. Thank you, ma'am. A year ago, I would not have even applied. I did not think they would take me seriously. But now things feel different. After lunch, Sarah attended a leadership meeting. All the department heads were there. Captain Rodriguez, the medical officer, was giving a presentation about base health initiatives. The male officers listened carefully. They asked questions and took notes. Nobody interrupted Rodriguez or talked over her. Nobody dismissed her ideas. Sarah remembered interviewing Rodriguez 6 months ago. She had described meetings where male officers ignored her until a male doctor repeated her exact words. That did not seem to be happening anymore. Later that afternoon, Sarah met with her task force. They gathered around a conference table to review progress. Lieutenant Chen presented first. We have completed the review of all training materials. We removed gender-specific language and added examples of diverse leaders. The new materials have been distributed to all instructors. Major Bryant spoke next. He was the officer who had complained about men feeling uncomfortable 6 months ago. But he had become one of the strongest supporters of the changes. The mentorship program is working well, Bryant reported. We have paired 50 junior soldiers with senior mentors. Both men and women are participating. The feedback has been very positive. Junior soldiers say they feel more supported. Senior soldiers say they enjoy helping the next generation. Sergeant Davies presented statistics about gate operations. Stops for additional questioning are now equal between men and women. We have not had a single complaint about gate procedures in 3 months. The guards are following the new protocols consistently. Sarah listened to all the reports. Then she said, "This is excellent progress, but we cannot become comfortable. Culture change requires constant attention. We need to keep monitoring, keep training, and keep improving." Everyone nodded in agreement. That evening, Sarah decided to test something. She changed into civilian clothes and drove to the main gate. She wanted to see if the changes were real or just surface level. She approached the checkpoint. A young female guard stepped forward. "Good evening, ma'am. May I see your identification, please?" Sarah handed over her ID. The guard studied it carefully, then checked her tablet to verify the information. She looked at Sarah's face, then at the photo on the ID. "Thank you, General Martinez. Welcome back to base," the guard saluted and opened the gate. No extra questions. No doubt. No assumption that Sarah did not belong. Just professional, respectful service. Sarah drove through the gate with a smile on her face. This was what success looked like. She drove around the base one more time before heading to her quarters. She passed the barracks, the training fields, the administrative buildings. Lights were on in windows. Soldiers were studying, relaxing, preparing for tomorrow. This was her base now. These were her soldiers. And they were better than they had been 6 months ago. Not perfect. There was still work to do. But definitely better. Back in her office, Sarah wrote an email to military headquarters. She described the changes at Fort Henderson. She shared the statistics and the success stories. She recommended that other bases adopt similar programs. Within days, she received responses. Several other base commanders wanted to visit Fort Henderson to learn about their programs. The head of military personnel wanted Sarah to speak at a leadership conference. A military journal asked her to write an article about creating inclusive cultures. Fort Henderson was becoming known throughout the military. Other bases were watching and learning. The changes Sarah had started were spreading beyond just one base. One afternoon, Sarah received a visit from a young captain named Williams. She had just been assigned to Fort Henderson. "General, I requested this assignment specifically," Williams said. "I heard that Fort Henderson is different, that it is a place where everyone gets a fair chance. I wanted to be part of that." Sarah felt proud. This was the real measure of success. People wanted to serve here. They saw Fort Henderson as a model worth joining. "Welcome to the base, Captain," Sarah said. "I think you will be happy here. But remember, maintaining a good culture is everyone's responsibility. We all have to work at it every day." "I understand, ma'am. I am ready to contribute." As summer progressed, Sarah continued her daily walks around the base. She noticed more small changes. In the gym, men and women worked out together in all areas. In the library, photos of famous military leaders now included both men and women. In the recreation center, women's sports teams were winning more competitions and getting more recognition. The mess hall had added a wall of excellence featuring outstanding soldiers. Half of the photos showed women. Nobody thought this was unusual anymore. It had become normal. That was the key word. Normal. 6 months ago, seeing women in leadership roles felt unusual to many soldiers. Now it was normal. Women instructors teaching combat skills, women mechanics leading repair teams, women officers making important decisions. All normal. Sarah knew that the 2 young guards at the gate had played an unexpected role in this transformation. Their mistake had revealed a problem, and Sarah had turned that problem into an opportunity for change.